Hello, I am Shona McCarthy. I'm the Chief Executive of the Edinburgh Fringe Society, and I would like to thank the Global Social Leaders Programme for asking me to do this keynote today. I've been asked to talk about how to make the global local, and I'm going to do that by using possibly 3 or 4 examples from throughout my career of how I think I have made that mix between the global and the local in different jobs that I've done. My starting point today is to tell you that I love what I do. I'm deeply passionate about what I do, and I'd be no good at selling beans. I work in the arts because I have a deep-rooted belief in the importance of the arts. And I think that stems back to my starting point where I grew up. I was born in 1968 and I grew up in Northern Ireland, which, for those of you who don't know the history of that place, it was a society that was divided by a civil conflict. So I grew up experiencing violence and a determination to pigeonhole me or to box me into being from one community or another community, to having one identity or another identity. And so the arts for me became the one place where I could be other, the one place where I could feel comfortable to be myself and not be determined by the labels that other people were putting on me. So the arts for me are not simply about entertainment, they're about identity and community and freedom of expression and a means of being able to look at things from a different perspective. And I think artists have a very particular way of articulating ideas with originality and helping you to see things differently and to look at things from the other perspective. So the arts for me are something that is deeply important and deeply essential to who I am as a human being. So my first opportunity to really take that theme of making the global local, I was lucky in that my very first job was to run a children's film festival in Belfast. Belfast was the capital city of the north part of Ireland and was at that time still experiencing what was called the Troubles, the violent conflict. So the idea of having a children's film festival in that city doesn't seem like a particularly natural decision. And yet here we were with this small organisation, and I think deeply at its heart, and the reason it appealed to me so much was because it was about a way of bringing the world to young people in Belfast without them having to travel. So we showed films from every country, from India, from America, from Africa, from all over Europe, and this was really a way, as I said, to bring that kind of global perspective into a very local setting. Many young people who came to the festival would never have left their own city before. Some of them, it was a big deal even to come to a cinema in the city centre. So to be able to show films and expose them to ideas and storytelling from around the world through the medium of film was that very first moment where I was able to make that connection between the global and the local. And again, for me, growing up in a place that was very inward looking and very obsessed with its own troubles and its own local conflict, it was really important actually to be able to be exposed to ideas and stories from the rest of the world in order to broaden my own mind and horizons. And then as I took up this job in a children's film festival, to pass on that experience and opportunity and learning, and the opportunity to look outward and to look to the world and to look internationally and learn from others, I thought was something fundamentally important for young people in the community that I had grown up in. And I guess some of the things that I learned from that first job were that money and support will follow really good ideas, because Cinemagic grew from being a small fledgling film festival to being a really major event on the global calendar, and we had filmmakers and creatives who travelled from around the world to come to that festival and experience that festival and share their learning and their understanding with young people in Belfast. So I learned to be determined. I learned to make the ask, because so many of these, and many of them are very famous people. I mean, Roy Disney, who was the head of the Disney company in Los Angeles at that time, flew in on his private jet to do a keynote at a conference in Belfast about children's film. And he did so at his own cost and his own expense. And he did that because I asked him. And I was only in my 20s at the time, and that was one of the things that I really learned was don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to just put the opportunity out there to people, because the worst thing that can happen is that they say no. But in my experience in Belfast, nearly everyone that we asked said yes. And it was also my first real kind of opportunity to understand that when you work on these kinds of projects, you're making an investment for the future. So people always ask the question, well, why should we support a children's film festival? It doesn't have economic impact. It's not bringing billions into the economy. But for me, 30 years on, I still have people in my professional life now who will come to me and say, do you remember when I attended a workshop in Belfast, or I visited Cinemagic, the Children's Film Festival, because that was the starting point in my career as a journalist or a playwright or a technician. And I still meet those people every day in life who got their starting point at a children's film festival in Belfast. And I'm very proud that that festival is still continuing and still very successful today. The next moment in my career that I want to refer to is back in 2011, when Derry, Londonderry, the second biggest city in Northern Ireland, won the title of the UK City of Culture. That was the United Kingdom was giving this title to one city right across the whole of the UK to host for an entire year a cultural programme that would really put that city into the spotlight. And Derry won the title, and I had the opportunity to go and put together a team, put together the budget, and really create a cultural programme for an entire year. And what was significant and what was exciting about that was that Derry was a city that had a very strong history of conflict and being a focal point for the conflict in Northern Ireland. So it had quite a dark past, and was a city that really needed to tell a different story, a city that needed to explore and express its cultural identity in a way that wasn't simply the bombs and bullets that had been represented in the news stories that had gone out nationally and internationally before. So this City of Culture moment was really a chance to connect a small place to a much bigger world and a much bigger perspective, and to set a new story for that place, to reset it in a moment in time. So the approach that we took was to ensure that we did something exceptional and extraordinary, that we put together a cultural programme that would bring some of the best artists, the best companies, the best dancers, the best music from around the world. But we would also expect it to in some way tell stories of our local place, and to work with local people and to upskill them, and also to learn from them and to learn from their art and their practice. So again, that whole notion of making the global local became something that was absolutely in every bit of thinking around the development of that project. And we were very determined to move away from the old stories, the cliches, the negatives, the kind of boring rhetoric that had been churned out about that city year after year, and try to really say something different and something new. And fundamentally, what we were trying to do was to connect the local and the global. So what did we do? So we brought artists and companies from different parts of the world, and we asked them to work in a different way. So if it was a major dance company with a world-renowned choreographer, we would ask them to come and to recruit local dancers, to work with local dancers, to recruit local musicians, to rehearse with them, to audition with them, and to create a new piece of work that could both bring their global perspective, but to use that to tell a local story with local performers and local artists. And that was the approach and the concept that we took the whole way throughout. The Tate Gallery in London, their biggest annual visual arts prize is the Turner Prize, which is given to the kind of most cutting edge contemporary artist in the UK every year. So we brought the Turner Prize out of England for the first time ever and hosted it in Derry. But we didn't host it in a gallery. One of the things that was still a remnant of the violent conflict in Derry was the British military barracks, which was still located there. And we were able to use that site and the former military barracks as the gallery and the space to host the Turner Prize. So it meant that people were having to see these spaces in the public realm differently and to look at them afresh, which goes right back to my starting point about the importance of the arts and the way that the arts can be a mechanism for seeing something old or taking an old idea, but seeing it in a different light, seeing it in a new way. And we did that time and again throughout the City of Culture year in Derry. We took places and spaces in the public realm and we transformed them with local artists, with international artists, with companies from across the UK, so that people could really see them in a different light. And it worked. We had over 10,000 positive media stories, and that was from a starting point of absolute negativity and a determination to tell negative stories about the place. So to have journalists and media come from around the world and to be suddenly filming musicians and dancers and art and fireworks and events that transformed the city's landscape was something that was really important and a huge success story. So that, again, that fusion of working with global and international artists and storytellers, but to really reclaim the story of your local place was the real success of the City of Culture in Derry, Londonderry, or as we like to call it, legendary. So the last example that I want to talk about is my current job, the Edinburgh Fringe. Wow. I think I'm going to have to start by explaining a little bit about what the Fringe is and what it looks like, and hopefully in that kind of in that description you'll understand exactly how the Fringe has always worked to make the global local. So the Edinburgh Fringe is quite simply the biggest performing arts festival in the world. It's also an arts market, and by that I mean a gathering place for creative people from across the world to connect with curators and programmers from festivals and theatres around the world, to connect with people who are selecting work to be transferred onto screen. And it's a real melting pot for that kind of connection between creatives, programmers, curators, media, critics. And to give you a sense of the scale, It is now the second biggest ticket selling event in the UK, or in the world actually, after the Olympics and the FIFA World Cup. And the thing that's really extraordinary about the Edinburgh Fringe is that it doesn't happen every 4 years, it happens every single year. We have almost 4,000 shows that happen, with 50,000 performances of those shows over a period of 3 weeks every single August. The city is literally alive with energy and buzz and creativity. There are 323 different venues. There's a massive street performance scape where street performers entertain crowds that gather around them. It takes over every space and venue, and people come from 55 different countries last year were represented on the stages of the Fringe Festival. So it's really something quite exceptional and quite extraordinary. And I want to speak for a moment about its starting point, because I think that also roots this festival in Edinburgh, a small city in Western Europe, in Scotland, to the rest of the world. So the Edinburgh International Festival, which is our sister festival, started back in 1947. And the reason that that festival started was because there was a need to have some focal point that was driven by culture in the UK after the horrors of the Second World War. And the decision was made that this would be a festival that was hosted in Edinburgh, and it would be a means of trying to reconnect people from across Europe. And the Fringe Festival was the one that started in that same year because some local companies wanted to be part of that international festival and that celebration of the human spirit after the horrors of war. But these local companies were told at the time that they were too amateur and they weren't good enough to participate. So they decided that they would perform anyway, and that they would put on their shows on the fringes of the Edinburgh Festival. And that's really where the idea of Fringe was born, because it meant something that was happening on the edge of. And now today, the Fringe has become this huge and massive event. So something that started as a local response to a global initiative has now grown to become this extraordinary international celebration of culture and art. And I think it's something that makes Edinburgh feel really very different in that 1 month of the summer. Edinburgh can be quite a monocultural city at other times of the year, but when the Fringe happens and the Fringe comes, it literally feels like a diverse, colourful city where anything can happen. And I suppose it's the thing that really drew me to want to work there, is that I think it's a festival that's open access, which means that anyone can take part. If you can find a venue to host you and you have a creative performance or a show that you want to put on, then you're welcome to come and put on that show in Edinburgh in August. So it's that principle of open access, that anyone can take part. It's a platform for freedom of expression, where no show or idea is censored, and we don't select or curate the work. There is no one single curator or artistic director of the Edinburgh Fringe. It is a collection of work and shows that the audience themselves then become the curator of their own festival experience within the huge range that's on offer. It also doesn't have a particular idea of what is art and what isn't art. So you can have someone right at the start of their career sharing a stage or a platform with someone who is a world-class professional at the top of their career. You can have comedians in one venue, you can have cabaret, you can have storytelling, you can have improv, you can have contemporary dance alongside magicians putting on shows that are all about magic. You can have world-class circus. It literally is a space where anything can happen, and the boundaries of what is and isn't art, what's quality, what's emerging, what's cutting edge, what's familiar, all of these things are possible in this one festival city at this one time of year. In 2020, for the first time in its 73-year history, the Edinburgh Fringe and our sister festivals will not happen this year. Coronavirus has been a global pandemic that none of us could have foreseen. And one could get very sad and very morose about the impact that it has had in the city, and our theatres are closed down, our cinemas are closed down, our festivals are cancelled. But I think we also have to take this as a moment and seize it as an opportunity, and to determine how we are going to do things differently. And I think there's a real moment for us to look at the impact that our cultural events have had on the environment, and also the impact they've had on our cities, and how we can do things even better when we emerge from the after effects of coronavirus. And I think this whole idea of the global and the local will most definitely come into play in our thinking going forward. I don't think anyone wants to see so many people flying around the world. I don't think anyone wants to see a continuation of the carbon emissions and the detrimental effect on our planet that we've all been having in one way or another. So we need to find ways to do things differently. And at the Fringe Society, we were already on this journey. We already had set out major ambitions to be the most green festival in the world, to be a festival that was accessible, whether you were from a working class community, whether you're from a black and ethnic minority community, whether you have a physical impairment or a disability of any kind. We already had set out major ambitions to be on this journey, to be open, to be accessible, to be properly diverse. And I think I want to see this moment in time, this fallow year when we have no festival, as an opportunity to really explore, when we come out the other side of this, how can we accelerate all of those ambitions? And that's really where the attention and focus of myself and my team will be. And I think one of the ways of doing that is, of course, looking at how we can innovate in the digital space. How can we still connect out to the world and be completely international and outward looking, but using digital platforms to do that? So much of our kind of connection with international programmers and industry will shift onto the online and the virtual space. And then at a local level, how do we use this time to expand the connection with the arts and the opportunity to directly experience the arts into our local communities and into our school settings? And, I think this is a moment to actually take the time to make sure that we're really rooted into civic development, into citizenship, and into real kind of ownership of the opportunity to be creative and to express yourself creatively at a local level. So the real challenge going forward is that beautiful DNA of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, which has always connected the local and the global. How do we ensure that in a world where people will necessarily have to travel less, and where we have no idea how much longer social distancing will be in place, how long it will be before our theatres and public spaces can open up again? So the challenge for us as innovators and cultural leaders is to find new ways of doing these things, and to find new ways of making connection, and new ways of working with our artists and creative people to still open up the world, but to open it up in a more even and equitable way, so that those who maybe haven't had the money to be able to afford to go to theatres, or haven't had the chances in life to be able to learn a musical instrument, is there ways that we can repurpose and refocus some of our resources and attention as cultural organisations to be able to ensure that that kind of inequity doesn't keep happening whenever we come back after coronavirus? What might the Edinburgh Fringe look like going forward? I think we will have definitely expanded our local footprint, engaged more with local audiences, but also found new ways of engaging the world, both digitally and also, I guess my final point is that I hope that always artists and creative people will be able to travel and will be able to come from other places and go to other places, because they are the storytellers. They are the people who can communicate their own experience from their own countries in their own voices, and share that knowledge and understanding through the arts.